Hi, I'm Lisa Gonzales, Chief Business Officer here in Mount Diablo. And in this week's Ask the CBO, we're going to cover why the district had millions of dollars in books and supplies carryover. Hi, I'm Lisa Gonzales, Chief Business Officer here in Mount Diablo Unified. And in this week's Ask the CBO, we're going to take a look at the topic, why did we have millions of dollars in books and supplies carryover? Let's go ahead and get started. First of all, I want to explain what a budget really is. To start with, a budget is an estimate or a plan about what we believe we will receive in money from a number of different sources, and then what we believe we will have in expenditures. It is very similar to what we all do at home. If we have an income of, let's say, $5,000 before taxes, we know that $3,000 goes to a house payment or to a rental payment, $250 for a car payment, another $500 for food, maybe $400 or $500 for insurance, and so on. And if something changes, like we get in an accident and we need a rental car or we need funds for a deductible, we have to adjust something there. And so it changes our budget. Same exact thing here in our school district. Briefly, I want to just share about how budgets work and what the timeline is. So this slide shows that in June of 2020, we presented and received approval from the school board for our budget, our estimate, our plan for the year. In November, we presented our first interim report. It talked about what our spending looked like from July through October. In March, we have our second check-in. We call that our second interim. That will happen next week, and it takes the expenses from November through the end of January. And then in June, we present a budget for the upcoming school year. But then we wait until September, when all of our books have closed, to share our unaudited actuals. And at that point in time, we have the best idea to know what our spending looked like in this school year. It takes us that time, and we take a look at reconciling salaries, making sure that those who have retired have ending dates to their salaries and benefits, purchase orders that were filled at the last minute during the school year. All of these things then roll up. And then we have an idea as to what is left. This slide here shows the accounting codes that school districts use in their budgets. These codes are used across the state of California. They are the same exact categories and the same exact numbers. So all of our revenue, or our cash in, and our expenditures, or our cash out, belong in one of these categories. Some of them are super easy and clear to understand, like salaries. In the 1000s, we have salaries for teachers, psychologists, counselors, many of our administrators. The 2000s are for our support staff, like office staff, custodians, bus drivers, grounds crews, those that work in food services, and another group of administrators. Any benefits that are paid, health, retirement, unemployment, they're all in the 3000s. For just right now, we're going to skip the 4000s and the 5000s, and let's take a look at the 6000s. Those are for large-scale maintenance, building, refrigeration in kitchens, HVAC systems. The 7,000s have two special groups. It's where we're able to move funds in and out, particularly to the County Office of Education, or it's where we put our $41 million tax revenue anticipation note. In the 7,400 range, it's where we make contributions from our general fund into specific programs like transportation or special education. So again, all the funds that come in and out have to go into one of these categories. The categories and the titles on them are preset. So now let's take a look at the 4000s. The 4000s are coded statewide in a category called books and supplies. But it is very much a misnomer, because this category goes well beyond books and supplies. The 5,000s, just for reference, are any services, travel, photocopy contracts, agreements for non-public schools, legal fees. Those all go into that category. So in a nutshell, when we've got money left at the end of the year, for the most part, it'll land in one of these two. But for us this last year, the bulk of it landed in books and supplies. So this is a catch-all, and it's because it's one of the few places where we can really make sure that funds are carried over and noted appropriately. So now let's take a look at why there were books and supplies carryover funds this year. Why in that category? This year we had a little over $13 million when we closed our books and we reported it out in September. $13 million in books and supplies carryover. Before I break that down, I want to explain why it happened in the first place. First of all, school sites had funds last year that they didn't spend because students were not on campuses for almost 3 full months. So we allowed the school sites to keep those funds and to spend them this year. There are also a great deal of funds and accounts at school sites that have been fundraised by the PTA or the PFC or the foundation. There are school sites that have received grants and donations. They have field trip accounts. They have department accounts like the math department or the athletic department. They even have grade level accounts like first grade and second grade and third grade. Those are all under the control of the school site, but they fall into the category of books and supplies for the sake of carryover. Again, a state accounting process. So for those of you parents who are involved at school sites, you know that accounts exist like this, and the teachers certainly know about it too, because it's where they're able to go in and estimate what it is that they'd like to do in their specific grade level, and the funds carry over. The pandemic resulted in larger amounts than normal. But again, we see those as being funds that belong to the school sites. We have some departments that didn't spend all of their funds, so we adjusted those this year based on need and projects, and we will do that again as we move into next year. We receive many multi-year grants, like Career Technical Education or the Low Performing Student Block Grant. If we receive 3 years of a grant for $3 million, and that grant is supposed to have $1 million spent the first year and $1 million spent the second year and $1 million spent the third year, after year 1, we're going to have $2 million worth of carryover. And after year 2, we're going to have $1 million. And so it makes it look like it hasn't been spent, but in actuality, it is a 3-year budget. It carries over into books and supplies, even if it is paying for people. We had some funds that arrived very late last school year. As a matter of fact, our Comprehensive Support Initiative, our CSI funds, we received $600,000 on March 25th. It's pretty hard to spend that much money when the funds arrive, when schools weren't open and the timeline for purchase orders had closed. So of course, that money is going to carry over into the next year. We also have a number of our budgets that come in from the state and federal government that are restricted, which means we get the funds. They can only be spent a very particular way, and there are no exceptions. So it's not like we can sweep those and use those to cover salaries or anything else. And by process of elimination, if something doesn't belong in any other category, it falls into books and supplies carryover. So let's take a look at what that amounted to this past September in our unaudited actuals. I want to preface with 2 things. First of all, you see orange font. Everywhere that you see orange font, those are state or federal funds that are restricted and specifically earmarked for a unique program, service, or group of students. We have little flexibility with those funds. Where you see an orange asterisk, These are spending and funds that were hampered based on the pandemic. And in every single case, the funders provided school districts with extensions because of the pandemic. The intent of the funds were to provide programs, and they want to make sure we continue to use them for students. Otherwise, we would have had to give them back. So remember how school sites didn't have students for 3 months last year? Our more than 55 school sites had over $2 million in unspent funds. So we gave them a year of grace. The funds have to be spent this year. We did put some constraints on that carryover, specifically for instructional type materials, which is why you see many sites that are purchasing Chromebooks this year, especially to replace the ones that they know are not going to be usable after the end of this year. In most school districts, all of those funds would be swept. We didn't do that. We told the sites, you have one more year to spend them. Another $2.7 million was earmarked within school budgets for things like the field trips, the parent donations, school marquees, gardens, robotics, coding, the department budgets, the grade level budgets. All of those, that's what it amounted to. We have an after-school grant that's called ACES. You might know it as our CARES program after school. Well, guess what? No students toward the end of last year. Not all the funds could be spent. So the state gave us an extension. We also received some federal funds. We call those Title I funds, Title II, Title III, Title IV, the titles. They're all part of specific programs. And again, schools close, learning continues, but we're not able to spend all of the funds. They're very restricted, and we were given additional time to be able to do that. The CSI, the comprehensive improvement that I mentioned in a prior slide, we didn't get that money until March 25th. So of course it was going to roll over. We had a CTE grant, almost $1 million remaining in a multi-year grant. Our low performing student block grant was supposed to be used last summer for large scale summer school and credit recovery programs, but we couldn't have students on campus. So it was reduced to some smaller, site-based credit recovery programs, and the rest of those funds will be used. Finally, we had another $1 million in an account that is ed code required. It is a set aside that can only be used for routine restricted maintenance. Again, very restricted funding, and we are always going to have carryover in that budget. So really, when you take a look at all of these added up, you see 12.3 million out of about 13 million of the carryover. But as I described them, what you were hearing things that weren't necessarily books and supplies. Again, we don't have much flexibility because the way our state financial system is set up, this is where the money goes at the end of the year. So the 400s are coded by the state, and this is why we had that amount of money. Now, I know you've asked, why isn't the district spending these funds? We could have gone back and we could have swept them. We could have given them back. But let's think about the optics on that. If you're supporting a school site, the last thing you want to hear is that because you didn't spend your funds, you lost all of them, or that we were giving money back to the state or federal government. So this last year was an anomaly. We don't ever expect to have that much carryover again, but I hope this better explains a little bit of it. One of the other things that we are working with all of our staff on is this idea that we spend this year's funds on this year's students. We really want rainy day savings to go away as much as possible. And we're training our leaders in how to do this so that the funds that are really raised are for the students that are in school that year. And this isn't always easy. When my fellow administrators and we all went to school to receive our administrative credentials, there was never a course on budgeting. It's really a hands-on learning experience. And under the direction of Mika Arbelbide, who is our Director of Fiscal Services, we are working really hard and are committed to making sure that we are providing the best training and the support for all of our school administrators so that they can lead the budget analysis and development process. So that's it for this week. I know it was a little long, but I know there have been many questions, and I hope that this really gets at the root of some of the questions you've had and perhaps some of the misinformation that's out there. If you've got a question for next week,